Okay, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
It's raining. All it ever does is rain, right? Rain. So it's raining out there. We're going back 34 years. Some of you probably had kids 34 years ago, maybe even living at home, right? I was, 33 years old at that point and had 2 kids of my own who no longer live with me. So anyway, and I have those kids went on to have grandkids for me. Anyway, 1989 is a year of major transition, both politically and in your homes, with things like Game Boy. George H.W. Bush was sworn in as President of the United States, and this gives me the opportunity to tell you that in 2007 I spoke at the George H.W. Bush Presidential Library in College Station, Texas. Your tax dollars at work. They hired me to represent the country before 16 nationals and 4 Americans. I gave 2 talks, one at Texas A&M and one at the George H.W. Bush Library. And you paid for it with your taxes. Tiananmen Square, China. This guy here trying to stop the tanks. Unfortunately, we don't know whatever happened to him eventually. The Berlin Wall comes tumbling down. The Bulgarian Wall. You didn't even know there was a Bulgarian Wall, but there was. That also comes down. Solidarity wins in Poland. Hungary changes course. The Velvet Revolution in Czechoslovakia, a place that doesn't exist anymore. The Czech Republic and Slovakia replaced them. The Romanian dictator Ceausescu is gone. And the Cold War is over. At least they keep telling us that the Cold War is over. There is Bush and there is Gorbachev. The United States invaded Panama because we like to invade countries or help out countries in Latin America. The Exxon Valdez springs a leak in Alaska and oil is all over the place to this day. And there's an earthquake in the San Francisco Bay Area that flattened the Bay Area Bridge, among other things. And the Central Park 5, big story. Park Moraldez, call it wilding, and it's street slang for going berserk. Maybe the tabloids in New York got ahead of themselves back in 1989 with that. And this is from the New York Daily News, which is now out of Allentown, Pennsylvania. And the Ayatollah wants to kill Salman Rushdie. Remember that? Yep. They put a fatwa against him. Hirohito dies. Hirohito, of course, the Emperor of Japan, back during World War II. And flag burning is free speech, according to the Supreme Court of the United States. If you burn a flag, that is part of free speech. And Pete Rose was banned from baseball for gambling. And how many baseball fans are in here? How many do you think Pete Rose should be in the Hall of Fame for his accomplishments on the field?
He should.
He should. And that's the debate that's gone on for 35 years or so. Well, 34 years, actually. And Art Shell becomes the first African-American coach in the National Football League since Fritz Pollard was the coach of the Akron Pros back in 1921. And the superhero returns, Batman. And it wasn't too impressive for me because I liked Adam West and Robin, Dick Grayson, played by Burt Ward, in that camp series called Batman that was around in the 1960s. That was so bad, it was absolutely hilarious, that show. This wasn't hilarious. And any of you buy your kids this, Game Boy? Or your grandkids? Didn't buy them the Game Boy? My kid snuck out of the house one day, went to Toys R Us to buy himself a Game Boy. He was, at that point, well, this was in the 90s. He was only 4 years old when it came out. So there's a new president. His name is George H.W. Bush. He went to Yale University, not too far from here. His father, Prescott Bush, was the Connecticut senator for a long time. And they were a major part of Fairfield County for a very long time. He faced a dramatically changing world as the Cold War is over after about 43 years. The Communist Empire is breaking up and the Berlin Wall is about ready to fall. But he's facing a problem in China. There are protests in China. The Chinese want some freedom. And this guy here walks in front of a tank to stop the tanks from rolling into Tiananmen Square. The protests were student-led demonstrations calling for democracy, free speech, and free press in China. The pro-democracy protesters initially marched through Beijing to Tiananmen Square following the April death of Wu Angban, a former communist leader who had worked to introduce democratic reforms in China. While mourning Wu, the students called for a more open, democratic government nationwide. Eventually, thousands of people joined the students in Tiananmen Square, with the protest numbers increasing to tens of thousands by mid-May. The protests were halted in the deadly crackdown known as the Tiananmen Square Massacre by the Chinese government on June the 4th and 5th. Estimates on the number of demonstrators killed vary between 700 and 2,700 killed protesting. There was the guy called the Tank Man. Now, I've showed you the pictures of the Tank Man. Nobody seems to know just who this Tank Man was, or really what happened to him. The identity of the protester captured on film and in countless photos, giving a defiant stop sign to a phalanx of Chinese tanks rumbling through Tiananmen Square, remains shrouded in mystery. Two men forcefully removed Tank Man from his position and carried him off. And that was the last time you saw a Tank Man. Chinese officials have refused to confirm his name or his whereabouts. The officials claim, well, we don't know what happened to him. Somebody took him away. Do you believe that the Chinese officials have no idea whatever happened to this guy? I don't. They know exactly what happened to him. We're unable to locate him. He just disappeared. The Berlin Wall construction. Now, the Berlin Wall went up in 1961. That's about 15 years after the United States, Britain, and France carved up Berlin, with various sections going to the United States, the French, the English, and the Soviet Union. Joseph Stalin didn't particularly like the fact that the Allies from World War II were set up in West Berlin. Construction of the wall was commenced by the German Democratic Republic, or East Germany, on August 13, 1961. The wall cut off West Berlin from surrounding East Germany, including East Berlin. The barrier included guards placed along large concrete walls accompanied by a wide area that contained anti-vehicle trenches, beds of nails, and other defenses. Although that they thought was secure, there were people who were able to flee East Berlin. And that is building the wall in 1961. 1955, the Soviets gave East Germany authority over a civilian movement in Berlin, passing control to a regime not recognized in the West. Initially, East Germany granted visas to allow its residents access to West Germany. However, following the defection of large numbers of East Germans, the new East German state legally restricted virtually all travel to the West in 1956. And there it is, the wall put up, keep people in, keep people out. With the closing of the east-west sector boundary in Berlin, the vast majority of East Germans could no longer travel or emigrate to West Germany. Many families were cut off, while East Germany employed, Berliners employed in the West were cut off from their jobs. West Berlin became an isolated enclave in a hostile land. West Berliners demonstrated against the wall, led by their mayor, Willy Brandt, who criticized the United States for failing to help West Germany out. But that didn't stop people from escaping. As you can see, this guy has decided he's had enough of East Germany and he slips into West Berlin. Almost 2 years after the Berlin Wall was erected, John Kennedy, the President of the United States, delivered one of his most famous addresses of his presidency to a crowd of about 120,000 gathered outside West Berlin City Hall, steps away from the Brandenburg Gate. Kennedy's speech has largely been remembered for one phrase: "I am a Berliner." And that was it. He left. Well, escaping East Germany or East Berlin before the wall's up, as you can see, people are just taking whatever they can to get out of East Berlin. The Berlin Wall was not one, but two walls, measuring 155 kilometers, 96 miles long, 4 meters or 13 feet tall. The walls were separated by a heavily guarded, minded corridor of land known as the Death Strip. They really didn't want you to escape. At least 171 people were killed trying to get it over it, under it, or around it. Escape from East Germany was not impossible until 1961, or from 1961, until the wall came down. 5,000 East Germans, including 600 border guards, managed to cross the border by jumping out of windows adjacent to the wall, climbing over barbed wire, flying in hot air balloons, taking a hot air balloon. Oh, I landed in West Berlin. Must have been a mistake. Well, I'm not going back, nor is the balloon going back. Crawling through the sewers, driving through unfortified parts of the wall at high speeds so you could get out. Tear down this wall. That is Ronald Reagan, President Ronald Reagan, who a couple of years earlier told Mikhail Gorbachev, the head of the Soviet Union, tear down this wall. The United States President Ronald Reagan had not been planning a visit to Berlin in 1987. He was going to be in Eastern Europe, or in Europe, in early June of 1987, first visiting Rome, then spending several days in Venice for an economic summit. At the request of the West German government, his schedule was adjusted to permit him to stop in Berlin for a few hours on his way back to the United States from Italy. On June 12th, Reagan gave a speech in front of the Brandenburg Gate in Berlin. The city was celebrating its 750th anniversary, and world leaders were stopping by to help in the celebration. Reagan stood about 100 yards from the concrete barrier dividing East and West Germany and said, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." Of course, he couldn't. It was the East Germans, but I guess he could, since they were a puppet state of the Soviet Union. And finally, the wall is torn down. Western pundits talked about the Reagan speech, viewed it as misguided idealism on Reagan's part, while the Soviet news agency TASS called it openly provocative and warmongering. Gorbachev himself told an American audience years later, we really weren't impressed. We knew that Mr. Reagan's original profession was that of an actor, and he sold 20 Mule Team borax as one of his jobs during a Western that he did back in the early 1960s, 20 Mule Team borax. But the walls do come tumbling down. On November 9th, Gunter Schabowski, a spokesman for the East Berlin's Communist Party, announced a change in the city's relations with the West. Starting at midnight that day, he said citizens of the German Democratic Republic were free to cross the country's borders. East and West Berliners flocked to the wall, drinking beer, champagne, and chanting, "Tafar, open the gates." At midnight, they flooded through the checkpoints. Do you know where they went? Do you know where the East Germans first went after they opened the wall? Do you know? They went to the mall. They went to the mall. They wanted to go shopping. They went to the mall to see what Western items that they were missing. That's where they went. First thing they did, hey, let's go to the mall. They did. So, the Bulgarian wall comes in. You probably don't even know about the Bulgarian wall, but there was a Bulgarian wall. There was the collapse of the Green Border in Bulgaria. The Bulgarian border was extremely dangerous for people to try to escape from places like East Germany, which ended up in people who ended up in Bulgaria. As early as 1958, the Bulgarian state secret security service asked the German state police to send operational staff to Bulgaria. Bulgaria repeated this request again in 1961. But it wasn't until the following year, after a number of escape attempts through Bulgaria had increased so much that the German Democratic Republic, their authorities reacted. It took until the end of the 1960s for the cooperation to become well established and more effective. From the end of the 1960s onwards, the number of successful escapes to Bulgaria fell sharply. Well, the Bulgarian communist dictator was also ousted because all of the Warsaw Pact countries, the Soviet satellites, are falling apart. In October and November, demonstrations on ecological issues were staged in Sofia, where demands for political reform were also voiced. The demonstrations were supposed to take place, were suppressed, but on November the 10th, Bulgaria's long-serving leader, Todor Zhivkov, was ousted by his Politburo. He was succeeded by a considerably more liberal communist, the former Prime Minister Peter Melandov. On December 11th, Melandov announced that the Communist Party would abandon its monopoly on power and that multi-party elections would be held the following year in 1990. And the Solidarity movement in Poland, which had been going on for quite a while. The struggle for freedom in Poland was defined by a single word: solidarity. Workers and union leaders, teachers and students, church leaders and intellectuals united in a common cause which hurled Poland toward democracy. The first round of voting saw Solidarity, led by the ship worker Lech Walesa, win between 70 and 80% of the vote. In most of the country, Solidarity began as a trade union in 1980, but soon evolved into a political movement. The communist government conceded, which allowed Solidarity to form a government. Solidarity's rise to power in Poland triggered other Soviet satellite countries in Eastern Europe, including East Germany, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Bulgaria, Romania, to evaluate its relationship with Moscow. At this point, Moscow doesn't have very much money. Hungary starts its transition to democracy. It is June 27th, and the foreign ministers of Hungary, or the foreign minister of Hungary, Gyula Horn, and Austria, Lajos Mach, cut through a section of barbed wire that had divided their country for decades. This symbolic act marked the beginning of the end of communist governments in Central and Eastern Europe. On October 23rd, on the 33rd anniversary of the 1956 Hungarian Revolution, the communist regime in Hungary was formally abolished. The Hungarian transition accelerated the collapse of communism rule throughout most of the Soviet Empire. The Velvet Revolution. This is Czechoslovakia. By the way, how many of you have roots in Eastern Europe? Anybody? I have roots in Eastern Europe. Anyway, my grandmother's family came from Prague, and they fled back, or they came over back around in the 1900s. But anyway, so I do have roots in these countries.
Is the Ukraine Eastern Europe?
Yes.
My father had to escape a pogrom there.
Yeah, so so this is all going on. Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union at this point.
Yeah.
The Velvet Revolution, November 17th, 1989, student protesters filled the streets of Prague. It was 8 days after the fall of the Berlin Wall, and the same tide of freedom that had swept Berlin seemed to have come to the Czech capital. Police tried to beat back, but the demonstrators didn't care. By November 20th, 500,000 Czechs and Slovaks filled Prague streets. The communists were forced out by November 28th. In December, the well-known dissident Václav Havel, who is a writer, his name was put forth as the Forum's candidate for interim president. He became the leader of the country, a former writer. The Romanian dictator, Nicolae Ceausescu, right before he's executed. This is fast. This is really, really fast, what goes on in Romania. A bloody battle played out in Romania, and that's where my wife's father's family is from, Romania. In December, that led to the collapse of one of Europe's most repressive communist regimes, which was led by the dictator, Nicolae Ceausescu. The revolt against the Ceausescu regime began in mid-December in Timisoara, but was violently quashed on Ceausescu's orders. Discontent quickly spread through the country, culminating in hundreds of thousands of demonstrations in the capital of Bucharest, following a speech by Ceausescu on December 21st. So this is, most of the people are poor, and he's swimming at this opulent place, swimming at the Spring Palace. Hey, you know, let them eat, well, I don't think he said let them eat cake. In the 1980s, Ceausescu imposed a series of austerity measures that plunged Romania into economic hardship. The economic situation worsened as Ceausescu spent cash on projects such as the construction of the People's Palace. After all, he's got to live somewhere, right? Even today, one of the largest buildings in the world. On December 22nd, the dictator and his wife, Alana, fled Bucharest Central Committee's building by helicopter as crowds stormed party headquarters. The couple was captured about 30 miles away in Targa Vista. And they were executed. Short and simple. You're on trial, boom, you're gone. The dictator and his wife were held for 3 days. Violence surged in the country as the situation became critical. The Council of National Salvation, a provisional government made up of former senior communist officials, decided that the Ceausescus needed to be put on trial. Trial starts on Christmas Day, lasts 2 hours. No proof was brought, no evidence presented. The Ceausescus were dragged out, begged for mercy, and shot in the freezing courtyard. 13 days later, the new Romanian government outlawed the death penalty. A little late for Ceausescu. Is the Cold War over? Well, there's evidence that the Cold War, now how many of you dove under desks during school? Remember the drills that you had to go through?
Yeah.
You went under a desk.
Yep.
If you had a desk here, I'd go under the desk. But you had to go under the desk. And I was in first grade. I remember saying to Mrs. Topper, why are we going under the desk? If they're going to kill us with a nuclear weapon, why not just relax? Oh, you don't understand. It took me a long time to find out why. I was an adult. Because the closer you are to the ground, the less likely you're going to breathe in all this radiation. But, you know, you're 5 years old. They're not going to tell you that. I had to read about it later on. It was on the internet, so it must have been true. Anyway, here is Gorbachev, and here is George H.W. Bush. On December 3rd, the United States President Bush and Gorbachev issued statements at the Malta summit, suggesting that the 43-year-old Cold War was coming to an end. But not much was accomplished in this series of meetings. Both sides agreed to work toward a treaty dealing with long-range nuclear weapons and conventional arms in 1990. Gorbachev and Bush agreed that another summit would take place in June 1990 in Washington, D.C. America invades Panama. Didn't like the Panamanian government, so they decided, you know what, let's go knock off Panama. Besides, we have interests there. There's a canal there that we built. The United States invasion of Panama, codenamed Operation Just Cause, because it was a just cause, according to the people in Washington, starts in mid-December. The primary purpose of the invasion was to depose the de facto ruler of Panama, General Manuel Noriega, who once Ronald Reagan said was a dictator of designer glasses, who was wanted by the U.S. authorities for racketeering and drug trafficking. Noriega annulled the results of the Panamanian general elections, which appeared to have been won by the opposition candidate, Indara. President Bush responded by reinforcing the U.S. garrison in the Canal Zone after a U.S. Marine officer was shot dead at a PDF roadblock. Bush authorized the execution of the invasion plan. And there is Noriega, who is not wearing the designer glasses that Ronald Reagan pointed out, maybe Reagan wanted designer glasses. On December 20th, the invasion of Panama began. Panamanian forces were rapidly overwhelmed, although operations continued for several weeks. Indira was sworn in as president shortly after the start of the invasion. Noriega eluded capture for several days before seeking refuge in the Holy See diplomatic mission in Panama City. The Pentagon estimated 516 Panamanians were killed during the invasion, including 314 soldiers, 202 civilians, 23 U.S. soldiers, and 3 U.S. civilians killed. The United Nations General Assembly and the Organization of American States both condemned the invasion as a violation of international law. Noriega surrendered January 3rd, 1990. Well, that's a bird covered with oil.
Yeah.
Bird covered with oil. The Exxon Valdez. Was the ship captain drunk, or was he not drunk? 34 years later, we still don't know. On March 24th, the oil tanker Exxon Valdez entered Alaska's Prince William Sound after departing the Valdez Marine Terminal full of crude oil. At 12:04 a.m., the ship struck a reef, tearing open the front and releasing 11 million gallons of oil into the environment. More than 1,000 miles of coastline were fouled. Hundreds of oil killed hundreds of animals, and they couldn't contain the oil spill. Ship's captain was Joseph Hazelwood, and he was acquitted of being intoxicated at the helm, but convicted on the misdemeanor charge of negligent discharge of oil, fined $50,000, and was given a sentence of 1,000 community hours of service. The earthquake in San Francisco, the Loma Prieta earthquake. And the baseball fans in here might have remembered watching this on ABC during the World Series between the San Francisco Giants and the Oakland A's as the game is about ready to start in San Francisco's Candlestick Park. It's October 17th. A magnitude 6.9 earthquake hits the San Francisco Bay Area, killing 67, causing more than $5 billion in damages. Despite the fact that the disaster was one of the most powerful and destructive quakes ever to hit a populated area in the United States, the death toll was relatively small. People were watching the baseball game, perhaps. The disaster known as the San Francisco-Oakland earthquake or the Loma Prieta earthquake was centered near Loma Prieta Peak in the Santa Cruz Mountains, which is south of the San Francisco Bay Area. The Marina District, where the Fisherman's Wharf area is, suffered extensive damage. A 1.25-mile segment of the two-level Cypress Street Viaduct along the Nimitz Freeway, I-880, just south of San Francisco-Oakland Bay Bridge collapsed during the quake, resulting in 42 fatalities when the upper level crashed onto cars on the lower level. Another hard-hit area was Watsonville, located several miles from the quake's epicenter. More than 30% of Watsonville's downtown, and 1 in every 8 houses destroyed. Well, the world does see the earthquake happen in real time. This is a picture of the earthquake rocks the 1989 World Series. The players and their wives jump onto the field. Game 3 of the World Series between the Athletics and Giants, scheduled to start at 5:35 local time, 8:35 on the East Coast, in San Francisco. There were thousands of people already in the stadium when the quake hit. It was the first major earthquake in the United States ever to be seen live on television. Experts credit the timing of the series as a lucky break that prevented massive loss of life in the region. The key in reducing the loss of life was the fact that many people on both sides of the bay had left work early or were staying late to participate in after-work group viewings and parties, reducing the traffic that otherwise would have been on the collapsed freeways at 5:04 p.m. Central Park 5 and bad journalism. I'm a journalist by trade. And what I see in journalism today, I broke in the 1970s. I was on WNEW radio at the age of 21. So I saw the guys like Pete Hamill and Jimmy Breslin and Wayne Barrett up close and personal. And I was mentored by a guy by the name of Sam Hall at WNEW and a guy by the name of Jim Gordon, who helped this 21-year-old, soon to be 22, learn the news business. Now, you don't have it in radio anymore. There's, in the New York area, you got 2 old news stations owned by one company, and they share personnel. It wasn't like that back in those days. And between 1978 and 1981, I didn't get paid very much money, but I learned my craft inside out. I won 2 AP awards. I broke the story that John Lindsay was running for Senate, state of New York. I interviewed Ronald Reagan. I interviewed Jack Kent, presidential candidates. I interviewed Ted Kennedy, presidential candidate. I covered the hostages returning from Iran up at Stewart Air Force Base in Newburgh. So I got an education. By the age of 24, I got a major education because I was on the streets. Anyway, the New York Daily News, New York Post, bad journalism. When Tricia Melly's body was discovered in New York City, Central Park, and early in the morning on April 20th, she had been so badly beaten and repeatedly raped, she remained in a coma for nearly 2 weeks and maintained no memory of the attack. The assault of the 28-year-old white investment banker who had been out for a jog the night before led to widespread public outcry and the quick arrest and subsequent conviction of 5 black and Latino teens. Anshawn McCray, 15, Kevin Richardson, 15, Yusef Salaam, 15, Raymond Santana, 14, and Corey Wise, 16, who came to be known as the Central Park 5. Now, one of the things I learned in radio was to do police reports, which I couldn't stand. I really couldn't stand it. But you call up the police department, they tell you what's going on, and you report it. You don't ask any questions, they just give it to you. And I've also seen accused murderers paraded in front of me, a guy named Belton Brims, and he was literally in handcuffs, shackles, and in a wire, and they made him walk in front of the media, because there were TV cameras there and all that up, and we said nothing. We said absolutely nothing. And there is the New York Daily News, and like I said, the New York Daily News today is run out of Allentown, Pennsylvania. There is literally no New York Daily News headquarters in Manhattan or New York. Wolfpack's prey, female jogger near death after savage attack by roving gang. The attack ignited a media firestorm, highlighting racial tensions in the city and playing into the preconceived notions of black American youth. When the 5 former teens convicted in the case were finally exonerated, many community leaders decried the miscarriage of justice that sent the Central Park 5 to prison. No New York newspaper, and I'm talking about 2 in particular, the New York Post, New York Daily News, even bothered to look into the facts of the case. Now, let's talk about television here for a second. If you watch local news, most local news consists of this: violence, mayhem, weather, sports, and entertainment, and sports is being pushed out the door. The entertainment, what's on our channel tonight? Weather, well, hopefully there's a hurricane and we can send some guy out there to get blown around. A lot of the TV stations show you surveillance video of a 7-Eleven being knocked off or whatever. Why? Because it makes money. They think people watch the news to see sensationalism. That's why they do it, and they've done it since Eyewitness News came to New York, 1975, but that started by a guy by the name of Al Primo, actually lived around here. He sold the format in 1965 in Philadelphia. It was called Action News. Television news was and is still preoccupied with the notion of not whether news reporting is accurate, but does it make good TV? Does it make a good show? And the same thing with radio. Is it a good show? That's all they care about. Facts, not as much. We call it in the business infotainment. Give you a little information and the rest is entertainment. Donald Trump. This is his ad. Bring back the death penalty, bring back our police. And he took this ad out back in 1989. Despite inconsistencies in their stories, no eyewitnesses, no DNA evidence linking them to the crime, the five were convicted in 2 trials in 1990. McRae, Salam, Santana found guilty of rape, assault, robbery, and riot. Richardson was found guilty of attempted murder, rape, assault, robbery. Corey was found guilty of sexual abuse, assault, and riot. They spent between 6 and 13 years behind bars, but the story does not end with the sentencing. They eventually get exonerated. Fair Labor Standards. The Fair Labor Standards Act of 1989. On November 17th, George Bush signs the Fair Labor Standards Amendment of 1989 into law, which by April 1981 would raise the minimum wage to $4.25 an hour federally. $4.25, 1989. The law was a significant victory for Bush over congressional Democrats who in the spring passed a bill, which Bush vetoed on June 13th, that would have raised the minimum wage to $4.55, a difference of 30 cents. But that was the minimum wage back then. Salman Rushdie, he's marked for death. There he is because of the book, The Satanic Verses. The Ayatollah Khomeini, 1989, is still around, issues a fatwa condemning Rushdie to death for alleged blasphemy in his novel, The Satanic Verses. Rushdie's Satanic Verses, which was published in September 1988, was banned in several Muslim countries and eventually triggered violent protests. Hirohito dies. He was spared after World War II by Douglas MacArthur back in September of 1945. On January 7th, the Japanese Emperor Hirohito died. It was Hirohito who led the country when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor back on December 7th, 1941. The Americans spared his life after the Japanese surrendered on September 2nd, 1945. Never tried as a war criminal. The reason why? Because he was goaded by General Douglas MacArthur and the Americans to get onto the nation's airwaves on January 1st, 1946 and deliver a speech. In that speech, he said, "I'm just a mortal. That's it. I'm just like you. I'm immortal." Myths, mere legends and myths created the false let's start that again. Myths and legends created the false conception that the emperor is divine. Hirohito and the nation's political leaders swiftly accepted a draft for a new Japanese democratic constitution produced by General Douglas MacArthur's staff. He would remain as a figurehead. 2019, the Japanese public broadcaster NHK obtained documents showing that Hirohito repeatedly felt sorry for World War II and tried unsuccessfully to express his feelings by using the word remorse in a 1952 speech. Flag burning is free speech. That's the guy who burned the flag. On June 21st, 1989, the United States Supreme Court upheld the rights of protesters to burn the American flag in a landmark First Amendment decision. In the Texas v. Johnson case, the court voted 5-4 in favor of Gregory Lee Johnson, the protester who burned the flag at the Republican National Convention a couple years earlier. He was arrested and convicted of breaking a Texas law that prohibited desecration of the flag. He was sentenced to 1 year in prison, ordered to pay a $2,000 fine. The Court of Appeals of the 5th District of Texas at Dallas affirmed Johnson's conviction, but the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals reversed it, and the Supreme Court said you could burn the flag. There's one of the Supreme Court justices, Antonin Scalia, and he said he wishes he could be king, but he was only a Supreme Court justice, even though he wanted to be a king. Antonin Scalia explained why he cast the deciding vote in the Johnson case on the principle of textual reading of the First Amendment. If it were up to me, I would put in jail every sandal-wearing, scruffy-bearded weirdo who burns the American flag. I think they taught that to him the fourth day of law school, that he could use words like weirdo. Scalia said in November 2015 at an event in Philadelphia, "But I'm not the king." Oh, Madonna. Any Madonna fans here?
My daughter.
Your daughter? She liked the
Was.
Yeah, she was. Madonna appealed to teenage girls when she initially came out. But anyway, she gets in trouble. Well, not really, because she's still selling lots of records. The music video for Madonna's Like a Prayer attracted a lot of criticism for its imagery. The song Like a Prayer music video rubbed the brass at PepsiCo, Pepsi, the wrong way. PepsiCo dropped Madonna as a marketing partner. The decision was made out of fear that religious groups would boycott Pepsi as a reaction to the video's imagery. On September 6th, Madonna performed Express Yourself at the MTV Video Music Awards and drew criticism for the way she was dressed and performed. I was part of this back in 1989 when Pete Rose was suspended from baseball. Dick Wagner was the general manager of the Cincinnati Reds back when Pete was with the Reds, back in the 1970s. And Dick Wagner once said to somebody, "You know, one day I'm going to open up the sports pages and read that Pete Rose is dead because he did something stupid." Pete Rose is still alive. He's 82 years old. And he's bet on baseball. He's admitted it. But so did John J. McGraw in 1905. He bet on his team to win the World Series against the Philadelphia A's, made a lot of money, but baseball never did anything about John J. McGraw. Baseball, Major League Baseball, Rule 21D. Any player, umpire, or club, or league official or employee who shall bet any sum whatsoever upon any baseball game in connection which the bettor has a duty to perform shall be declared permanently ineligible. No evidence was discovered that Rose bet against his team, the Cincinnati Reds. Rose's betting slips, written in his own handwriting, as well as other evidence, indicate that he only bet on certain Reds games. Pete Rose had the inside number to New York Sports Phone. He kept calling New York Sports Phone for years. You got the score on this, you got the score on that, you got the score on this, you got the score on that. He was buddies with Bobby G and others at Sports Phone. They didn't care, they gave him the scores. Rose was informally questioned in February 1989 by the then baseball commissioner Peter Ueberroth, who I lovingly refer to as PU. Other people call him St. Peter of Ueberroth. We never got along, although we buried the hatchet. In 1994, he actually bought my wife and I a dinner at the Doubletree in Scottsdale, Arizona. My wife said to him, "You own this Doubletree?" He said, "I own all the Doubletrees." PU, my buddy. Anyway, by this time, Major League Baseball owners elected Giamatti to succeed Ueberroth, who they basically fired, and the outgoing commissioner, PU, decided to leave the matter to be dealt with his successor, A. Bartlett Giamatti, the former president of Yale University. Sports Illustrated gave the public the first detailed report of the allegations that Rose had placed bets on baseball games on March 21st. John Dowd, one of the most miserable people you will ever want to deal with. Absolutely miserable. Even Tums and Rolaids couldn't help his acid stomach. Anyway, John Dowd interviewed many of Rose's associates, including alleged bookies and runners like Paul Jansen. He delivered a summary of his findings to the commissioner in May. In it, Dow documented Rose's alleged gambling activities in 1985, 1986, and compiled a day-to-day account of Rose's alleged betting on baseball games in 1987 when he became friends with Bobby G and King Wally over at Sports Phone. The Dow report documented his alleged bets on 52 Red games in 1987, where Rose wagered a minimum of $10,000 a day. Multiply that by 52, and you get, what do you get with that? You get $520,000, right? Yes, $520,000. Rose agreed to a lifetime ban from Major League Baseball on August 23rd. MLB agreed to make no formal finding with regard to his gambling allegations. He's on the outside looking in, and if you want to ask him for his autograph for $20, he will write, "Yes, I did bet on baseball. Sincerely, Pete Rose," on his autograph. He's ineligible to be enshrined in baseball's Hall of Fame. He's had very limited official Major League Baseball involvement since 1989. Debate remains whether he should be in the Hall of Fame or not. Roger Kahn wrote about the Brooklyn Dodgers in The Boys of Summer. That is his famous book. He was a Dodgers beat writer back in the 1950s. So he wrote a book with Rose in 1989 entitled Pete Rose, My Story. Kahn said he repeatedly demanded from Rose assurances that he had not bet on baseball. Rose always responded thusly, Kahn says, "I have too much respect for the game." Now he's calling Bobby G every night. He wanted scores. Several years after the book came out, Rose told an interviewer that, "Yeah, I bet on baseball." Roger Kahn said, "I wanted to vomit." Oh, that guy here, we're in Hawaii, is Art Shell, and he becomes the coach of the Los Angeles Raiders. He becomes the second African-American coach in the National Football League, and this is 1989. And this is, I gotta do the math here, but I think I'm right, 68 years after Fritz Pollard was the coach of the Akron Pros. It's October 2nd, 12:30 in the morning, as the Oakland Raiders owner Al Davis calls Art Shell's home. Janice Shell, his wife, answered but could not tell Art who was on the other line. When Art found out it was the Raiders owner, Davis, he took the phone upstairs. When he returned to the master bedroom, he told his wife his boss was thinking about making him the head coach. Davis had fired Mike Shanahan after the football team lost 3 of its first 4 games, and hired Art Shell. Well, in 1921, Fritz Pollard became the head coach of the Akron Pros and continued playing as he was the running backs coach. Pollard played for 4 different NFL teams and then was banned from the league in 1926 along with 8 or 9 other black players in a fateful decision to segregate, according to the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Jerry Seinfeld. How many of you watch Seinfeld? The show starred my cousin Jerry Stiller, my cousin, Ben Stiller's my cousin, played Frank Costanza on that show. Seinfeld almost never made it to TV. It was screened for 24 NBC executives, and while most laughed, one of them, Brandon Tornikoff, wasn't sold, notoriously calling it Too New York, Too Jewish. Before its TV airing, it was showed to a test audience of 400 households, given extremely negative reviews. Warren Littlefield, then second in command in NBC's entertainment division, would later recall in the History of Pilot reports, Seinfeld has got to be one of the worst of all time. When the episode finally aired, July 5th, 1989, it didn't do too poorly. Finished second in its time slot. NBC decided to order 6 shows in 1989, 1990 for the season. And there he is. There's my cousin Jerry and my 2 kids. He played Frank Costanza on that show. Jerry told me some wonderful stories about Ed Sullivan, when Ed used to go like that. That meant he was looking at what time it was because he wanted to get the acts off to get the commercials on. Money is money. Jerry and Mira. How many of you remember Stiller and Mira? Right. They were on 36 times on the Ed Sullivan Show. 36 times. The show was different, said Preston Beckman, who was then the head of NBC's ratings research department. No one had ever seen anything like it. It wasn't unusual for poor testing shows to get on the air, but it was very rare that they become big hits. The show was renamed Seinfeld. NBC ordered 4 episodes, with the first one showing on May 31st, 1990. Tracy Ullman's The Simpsons. They don't look like the Simpsons that you know, but that's where they started. Simpsons appeared first as short vignettes on the Tracy Ullman Show. These cartoon shorts acted as bumpers that are shown before and after commercials. Shorts were written by the cartoonist Matt Groening. Groening created The Simpsons in the lobby of Ullman's producer's office, James L. Brooks. He had been called to pitch a series of animated shorts, and he had intended to present his Life in Hell comic series. But he realized that animating Life in Hell would require him to rescind publication rights for his life work, so he decides to go in another direction. They ordered The Simpsons, and there I am with Homer and Marge and Lisa and of course Bart Simpson, and there they are. The Simpsons is the longest running scripted American primetime show. The Simpsons began on December 17th on Fox. The show has made billions of dollars for merchandising. One other story. I have a friend by the name Bill Goldstein. He was one of Berry Gordy's proteges at Motown. And he gets a call one day, can you do music for The Simpsons, incidental music? He said, no, I'm working on the TV show Fame at the time. I don't have the time. He says, but I do know somebody who does have the time right now. And they said, who's that? Danny Elfman. Danny Elfman ended up doing the music. Now, Bill's a friend of mine. We talk. Danny Elfman is more than a friend. Danny Elfman made tons and tons and tons of money. Bill couldn't do the show, thanks to Bill being busy. Danny hasn't had to work a day in his life since then. It's nice to have a friend like Bill. That's Jack Nicholson, Batman, superhero film based on the DC Comics character of the same name, created by Bob Kane and Bill Finger. Jack Nicholson played the Joker, Michael Keaton played Batman. The version of Batman, this version, had no resemblance to the camp TV show of the 1960s. The Dick Grayson Robin character, Batman's sidekick, was deleted from the film. Made $400 million. It was critically acclaimed. Game Boy. Anybody buy Game Boy for your kids, grandkids? I didn't have to buy one. My kids bought their own. Nintendo Game Boy was a handheld video game console that combined aspects of Nintendo's successful Nintendo Entertainment System television video game console with earlier handheld electric games marketed under Game & Watch. Japanese engineers thought the game was stupid and lame, and they called it Dame Boy. Dame is apparently a pejorative used in Japan. So what's the legacy? Well, I get to speak at the George Bush Presidential Library. There I am, right there. And they paid me to talk to 3 Russians, 3 Venezuelans, 3 Indonesians, 3 Nigerians, and 1 Canadian. Who am I leaving out? Nigerians, Indonesians, Turks. And 4 Americans to talk about the politics of sports business. Bush was 1-term president. He lost his re-election bid to Bill Clinton in 1992 in a 3-way race, which included the incumbent Ross Perot. Bush was one of 3 presidents in the 20th century who failed to win re-election. The others, William Howard Taft in 1912 and Herbert Hoover in 1932. The Tiananmen Square protests in China did nothing to improve the lot of the average person in China. In fact, the younger and uneducated members of the population know almost nothing about it. It's not taught in schools, and social media posts relating to the massacres are removed from the internet, and people don't know about it. This is East Germany, or was East Germany. It's German now. I took this picture which says, "We hate Nazis." We hate Nazis. That's what that picture is of me in Rastatt, Germany. Germany reunited 45 years, after 45 years in 1990. Germany today is one of the strongest countries in Europe. Czechoslovakia broke up on December 31st, 1992. Czech Republic, Slovakia. Poland has a parliamentary representative democratic republic. The president's the head of state, prime minister is the head of government. The former Warsaw Pact country is a member of the North American Treaty Organization, or NATO. That is St. Petersburg, Russia. Me and my wife in front of one of the churches there. The Soviet Union ceased to exist on December 31st, 1991. The collapse of the country based on economics. The Baltic countries of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania were the last to enter the Soviet Union as Union republics and the first to leave. On September 6, 1991, the Soviet government recognized the independence of all three Baltic states. Hungary is now led by a far right-wing extremist, Viktor Orban. The government has put limits on journalistic and academic freedom, has passed anti-LGBTQ plus legislation. Bulgaria has a parliamentary democracy since 1990. 4 parliamentary and 2 presidential elections have been held since the fall of the communist dictatorship in November 1989, followed by a peaceful and orderly change. The government has been shaky over the years. Romania is a constitutional republic with a democratic multi-party parliamentary system. The bicameral parliament consists of the state and chambers of deputies, both elected by popular vote. Human rights in Romania are generally respected by the government. And that is my wife in Panama City. Noriega surrendered on January 30th, 1990, after spending 18 days at the Vatican Embassy. He was flown by the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration officials to Miami to stand trial, ultimately found guilty of drug trafficking, racketeering, and money laundering. He spent the rest of his life in custody, died in 2017 at the age of 83 as a result of a complication from the operation to remove a brain tumor. Panama's economy is one of the fastest growing among Latin American counterparts. Its growth largely due to the expanse of the Panama Canal in 2016, but there's a wide gap between the rich and poor in the country. You go to central Panama City, and there are skyscrapers, designer stores, all that. Go about a mile later, and there's squalor. The Valdez. The Exxon Valdez oil spill was the worst oil spill in U.S. history until the Deepwater Horizon oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico in 2010. Exxon employees, federal responders, and more than 11,000 Alaskan residents worked to clean up the oil spill. Exxon paid $2 billion in cleanup costs and $1.8 billion for habitat restoration and personal damages as a result of the spill. More of the legacy. Salman Rushdie went into hiding under the protection of Scotland Yard and compelled to restrict his movements. In 1998, nearly a decade after the fatwa, there's no longer the fatwa against him. Rushdie becomes an American citizen in 2016. In August 2022, he's attacked, seriously injured out at the east end of Long Island in Chautauqua. He lost an eye. Pete Rose, still not in baseball's Hall of Fame. On January 1st, 2023, Pete Rose placed the first legal bet in Ohio when they had legalized sports betting. There's Game Boy. Game Boy was the dominant handheld console on the market for almost 2 decades, selling millions of examples. But the console died a quiet death in 2008 after the company shifted its focus to Nintendo DS. It sold 118 million units. Game Boy Advance, Nintendo Switch Online is an application released for the Nintendo Switch along with Game Boy. Nintendo Switch Online February 8th, 2023 in the Americas, and February 29th, 2023 elsewhere is now being sold. And that is it. Any questions, any comments about that? Was